Gurudev, Gurudev, Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Nitai Gaur Premanande. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivijagacharya Stotra Shri Srimad Divine Grace Bhai Chanarvinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivijagacharya Stotra Shri Srimad Divine Grace Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki. Ananda Gauri Vaishnava Vrind Ki. Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki. प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्री वसादि गौर भक्त वृंद की श्री राधा कृष्ण गोपिनाथ श्याम कुंड अर्जुन गिरि गोवर्धन की वृंदावन धाम की मथुरा धाम की जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की श्री मायापुर धाम की गंगा माई की यमुना माई की भक्ति देवी की श्री भैया ट्रांसफर बुक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन की श्री प्रॉपर ट्रांसफर प्रसाद डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन की Nitai Gaur Premanandi. All glory to the assembled Lord Hare Krishna. All glory to the assembled Lord Hare Krishna. All glory to the assembled Lord Hare Krishna. All glory to Shri Guru and Shri Guru. Hare Krishna. Welcome everyone to this morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. We're reading from Canto 3, Chapter 31, titled The Movements of the Living Entities. Text 15. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Canto 3, Chapter 31, Text 15. Yanmaya yuru guna karma nibandhanesmin samsarike paticharam tadapi shumenaha nashtasmiti punarayam pravinita lokam Yuktya kaya mahadanugraham antarenaha Yanmaya yuru guna karma nibandhanesmin Shamsarike paticharam tadabhishramenaha Nashtasmiti punarayam pravirnita lokam Yuktya kaya mahadanugraham antarena Yanmaya yuru guna karma nibandhanesmin Samsarike paticharam tadabhishramena Nastashmite punarayam pravinita lokam Yuktya kaya mahadanugraham antarena Word for word translation. Yat of the Lord. Mayaya Badamaya. Uruguna, arising from the great modes. Karma, activities. Nibandhane, with bonds. Asmin, this. Samsarike, of repeated birth and death. Pati, on the path. Charan, wandering. Tat, of him. Abhishramena, with great pains. Nasta, lost. Smriti, memory. Punaha, again. I am this living entity. Pravinita, may realize. Lokam, his true nature. Yukyakaya, by what means? Mahat Anugraham, the mercy of the Lord. Antarena, without. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Bhai Charana Ravinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Ki. Translation. The human soul further prays. The living entity is put under the influence of material nature and continues a hard struggle for existence on the path of repeated birth and death. This conditional life is due to his forgetfulness of his relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, without the Lord's mercy, how can he again engage in the transcendental loving service of the Lord? Purport. The Mayavadi philosophers say that simply by cultivation of knowledge, by mental speculation, one can be liberated from the condition of material bondage. But here it is said, one is liberated not by knowledge, but by the mercy of the Supreme Lord. The knowledge the conditioned soul gains by mental speculation, however powerful it may be, is always too imperfect to approach the absolute truth. It is said that without the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one cannot understand Him or His actual form, quality and name. Those who are not in devotional service go on speculating for many thousands of years, but they are still unable to understand the nature of the absolute truth. One can be liberated in the knowledge of the absolute truth simply by the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is clearly said herein that our memory is lost because we are now covered by his material energy. Arguments may be put forward as to why we have been put under the influence of this material energy by the supreme will of the Lord. This is explained in Bhagavad Gita, where the Lord says, I am sitting in everyone's heart, and due to me, one is forgetful or one is alive in knowledge. The forgetfulness of the conditioned soul is also due to the direction of the Supreme Lord. A living entity misuses his little independence when he wants to lord it over material nature. This misuse of independence, which is called Maya, is always available. Otherwise, there will be no independence. Independence implies that one can use it properly or improperly. It is not static. It is dynamic. Therefore, misuse of independence is the cause of being influenced by Maya. Maya is so strong that the Lord says that it is very difficult to surmount her influence. But one can do so very easily if he surrenders unto me. Mam eva ye prapadyante. Anyone who surrenders unto him can overcome the influence of stringent laws of material nature. It is clearly said here that a living entity is put under the influence of Maya by his will. And if anyone wants to get out of his entanglement, this can be made possible simply by his mercy. The activities of the conditioned souls under the influence of material nature are explained here. Every conditioned soul is entangled, is engaged in different types of work under the influence of material nature. We can see in the material world that the conditioned soul acts so powerfully that he is playing wonderfully in creating the so-called advancements of material civilization for sense gratification. But actually, his position is to know that he is an eternal servant of the Supreme Lord. When he is actually in perfect knowledge, he knows that the Lord is the supreme worshipable object and that the living entity is his eternal servant. Without this knowledge, he engages in material activities. That is called ignorance. Om Ajnanatirandhasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Guru Nunam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Cha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gauragi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatirubhascha Kripa Sindhuvaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna. We're reading from Canto 3, chapter 31, verse number 15. I'll read the translation. The human soul further prays. The living entity is put under the influence of material nature and continues a hard struggle for existence on the path of repeated birth and death. This conditional life is due to his forgetfulness of his relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, without the Lord's mercy, how can he again engage in the transcendental service of the Lord? So this chapter is a continuation of the discussion or the conversation that's happening between Mother Devahuti and Kapila Dev. I was just listening to a class by Ramabad Maharaj, and he was describing the context behind it. So, as a means of purifying myself, and it was so enlightening to hear again the context behind things, because it puts things into right perspective. Maharaj was describing that Mother Devahuti at the beginning of this conversation, she very well knows who Lord Kapila Dev is, and obviously there's no doubt to the position of Mother Devahuti. Still she goes and asks the Lord, I know the philosophy, I'm not this body, yet I have some attachment to this body or to my family. Please help me cut to this attachment. Very similar to the prayers by Mother Kunti in the first canto. Then from there on she requests the Lord, please help me cut through this bondage. There's a series of chapters right before this chapter. Kapila Dev starts off with chapter number 25 with the famous verse, how does one cut through this bondage? There's a famous verse in there. Chapter 25, verse number 20. Does anyone recall? Prasangamajaram pasam atmana kavayo viduhu sa eva sadhuso kritu mokshadvaram apavritam. Every learned man knows very well that attachment for the material is the greatest entanglement of the spirit soul. But the same attachment, when applied to the self-realized devotees, opens the door of liberation. So the attachment that we have to the material energy or to our own condition, if that is transferred to the sadhu, then that helps us cut through this bondage that we are entangled with. Then from chapter 25 moves on to chapter 26. That's a discussion of the Sankhya philosophy, where there is a categorization of matter, how everything first initially starts off with ignorance, and then from there on the categories of matter come into effect, and in the end that leads into dhyana yoga, which is meditation on the super soul, which Kapila Dev described that this is actually leading on to bhakti, meditation on the Supreme Lord itself. Then moving on to the next chapter where it's described the process of deity worship. Interestingly, what's the yuga that this conversation is happening? Satya Yuga. And deity worship, as we understand through Acharyas, applies to which yuga? Dwapara Yuga. So even though in Satya Yuga the process is meditation, Kapila Dev describes the process of deity worship, which is not a process, not the prescribed process for the age. So he explains in deity worship, and then Mother Devahuti says that if bhakti is pure and if a living entity is originally pure in position, by their constitutional position, how does one get, what's the entanglement with the modes of nature? And then Kapila Dev describes the three modes of nature, bhakti that's practiced. Bhakti itself is pure, but the performer is performing it in one of those three modes. Now leading on to this chapter, which describes the movement of living entities, we just read through a series of verses prior to this on how, when the living entity, through the union of the male and the female, how it actually comes into the womb of the mother. There are different kinds of living entities that take birth, one, through perspiration, through eggs, through plants and trees, and then by taking birth in the embryo. And we describe and we see how the process that's happening, the sequence of events, the sequence of what happens in each month. In this book here, right here, Bhagavata Subodhini, it's described, there's obviously the description that's given in the Bhagavatam, that is our Praman of what happens in each month. But then there's also a corresponding scientific evidence that actually provided what happens in each month. Um, Actually, in the medical science and in the world of empirical science, this is called information that is, I can't remember if it's not falsifiable or falsifiable, which means that it can't be proven wrong. So once I was hearing Maharaj, His Holiness Robert Maharaj saying that Bhaktivedanta Institute in Mumbai, in Juhu, had actually invited a Nobel laureate from Berkeley to give his assessment of the Sankhya philosophy that's presented in the Bhagavatam. So this Nobel laureate, I can't remember his name, had come to Juhu for a 3-month sabbatical. Just taken off and had come for 3 months. And from 4 in the morning all the way till 9 or 10 at night, undergoing all the austerities, even though this person was not attending Mangalarati, but he could see Mangalarati from the balcony of the devotees from Mangalarati, studying Sankhya under the supervision or the assistance of the team at Bhaktivedanta Institute. In the end, his assessment was nothing in this information is, like I said, I can't remember if it was non-falsifiable or falsifiable, but that everything in this is actually true to what's being described here. So this was the assessment of the Nobel laureate. So similarly, there is, as Prabhupada writes on one of the purposes in one of the previous verses, that this has been followed by medical science too. Now, obviously, to corroborate this, if someone in a community or someone that we know as a pediatrician can give a better, can relate to this better than someone like me or a layman person who wouldn't exactly understand what's happening here. But to be honest, a lot of times when we, as devotees, when we're celebrating someone's birthday, we always say, "May you never take birth again." Sometimes they say, we always know the pain and the suffering one undergoes at the time of death, but then there's also pain and suffering, as we see, that takes place at the time of birth. So when devotees say, "May you never take birth again," it didn't strike me until I read this chapter. It is painful, even though media or society paints it in such a, it's, I wouldn't say sugar-coated, but it presents a picture as birth being glorious, and in fact it is. It's the coming of life into this world. Obviously, Prabhupada always describes this, that if done properly and if the proper soul, the proper consciousness, so, a devotee that's actually coming into the family, then it's auspicious for everyone. So it does sound scary, it does sound fearful, and one may ask that why is Bhagavatam actually giving us, infusing fear, for us to understand transcendental subject matter. So the intention of the Bhagavatam, the forefront of the emphasis of the Bhagavatam is not to infuse fear to that extent, but a little bit of fear can help one deal with material energy with some wisdom. Prahlad Maharaj, what is his prayer in the 7th canto? What does he say? This was happening right after Nrsingadev killed his father, and when everyone in the assembly is so fearful to look at Nrsingadev, with his eyes, and he's just roaring, and at that time they put forward Prahlad Maharaj to please pacify Nrsingadev. And what he says there is, "My Lord, who are never conquered by anyone, I'm certainly not afraid of your ferocious mouth and tongue, your eyes bright like the sun, or your frowning eyebrows. I do not fear your sharp pinching teeth, your garland of intestines, your mane smoked with blood, or your high wedge-like ears, nor do I fear your tumultuous roaring, which makes elephants flee to distant places, or your nails, which are meant to kill your enemies. O most powerful and insurmountable Lord, who are kind to the fallen souls, I have been put into the association of demons as a result of my activities. Therefore, I am very much afraid of my condition of life within this material world. When will that moment come when you will call me to the shelter of your lotus feet, which are the ultimate goal for liberation from conditional life?" So, like that, devotees pray. It's not that they're fearful of forgetfulness of Krishna. Sometimes, one devotee had asked Srila Prabhupada, that famous stanzas you hear. Chakudana Julase Janme Janme Prabhusam. Srila Prabhupada, I want to take birth. Birth after birth, I want to serve you. And Srila Prabhupada said, first try to get out of this material world. And then, so we should serve or perform our duties, our Krishna consciousness with that determination to get out of this material world, because as Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur always said, this material world is not a safe place, or it is not a place for any gentleman or gentlewoman. So one has to understand what this material energy is, and once one has that knowledge, it helps them in their journey to achieving perfection. So as we were going through this verse talks about, touches on quite a few points, and in the interest of time we won't be able to cover all of it, but some that came to my mind was the prayers here are by the soul that's within the womb of the mother. It's actually praying to the Lord, and it is realizing this hard struggle for existence, that the ignorance that one is enveloped in. In the third canto, chapter 20, verse number 18, when Brahma is creating this universe, he actually creates 5 layers of ignorance. So for reference, you can refer to it, 3:20:18. We need to understand what are we up against, and then that helps us then seek more. It is said that when chants the holy name, one should chant in a mood of a baby that's actually crying for its mother. And that's only because we can understand that only if we know what is this illusory energy Maya going to put forward to us. We may not even know, but we should understand that a lot of times we say, why does Maya test a devotee who's actually taken shelter of the Lord? Well, I was reading a book by the Bhakti Tirtha Swami, and Maharaj was saying that Maya is actually Krishna's servant, and Maya will put forward tests in our life, and for a devotee, just to show their lack of readiness. If we are not ready, then, bam, we'll be faced with a situation where Maya will be like, look, this is what you need to work on. And as we work through those, Maharaj is giving an example. For example, if a drunken person comes into the temple, that person may act or speak or do things in a very obnoxious way. So naturally, some authorities will actually catch hold of that person and throw that person out of the temple. Now when that person is going to come back a second time, who observed the person the first time will be more vigilant and understand what this person did, so will examine them even more closely. And once that person passes this test, then come in and enter the temple. So that's how it is for us too. In the spiritual world, there is complete union to the will of the Lord. So obviously there's detail underlying it, but for us to fully be Krishna conscious in the spiritual world, that means that we have to do our part here. So coming to Lord Brahma and the 5 layers of ignorance that he actually creates, the very first ignorance, the very first layer is tamishra, or anger. This is due to, so each one of us, living entity, has minute independence to either serve Krishna, to serve the Lord, or to enjoy independent of the Lord. Now that enjoying mentality actually springs from envy of the Lord. So when we see, why is the Lord object of worship of everyone? It should be me. Or even the slight desire when it actually creeps in, that actually brings about envy in our hearts, and that is the very first layer of ignorance, and that's what actually puts us down into this material whirlpool. Then comes Andhatamishra, which means that now that I've fallen into this material world, I'm forgetful of my relationship with the Supreme Lord. I have lost an understanding of eternity of the soul, which means that this is the famous doctrine of the atheists, that we only have one life, so enjoy as much as you can. You won't accrue any sinful reaction for doing it, because you see very well at the time of death, everything is vanquished. So just enjoy, and there's no accountability at all. So the moment we take away the eternity of the soul, which means that even after this, as I'm in this body at the moment, I'm accruing reaction for whatever I'm doing, which will give me another body. The very moment I understand that I'm going to take another body, the question comes up, what will be my next body? And then what will be my next body? That means what am I doing to create my next body? So Srila Prabhupada in one of the purports writes that one who eats cow's flesh will actually have to take birth for as many hairs there are on the cow's body. So even if someone has a little bit of intelligence, they will think, if I have to take birth that many times, what will my birth be? And just, if someone can just understand that for next whatever millions of lifetimes, even for a moment of exposing of sense gratification, what amount of sins am I going to accrue, then one naturally becomes a bit more thoughtful on what to do next. Now this is all caused due to tamas, which is that everyone thinks that I am this body and everything related to this body is my property. Which leads one to moha, which means that now I'm in this body, this is my community, this is my society, and therein the sectarian mentality comes into place. Once it doesn't stop there, it leads into maha moha, which means I just get mad after all of my possessions. That's why you see someone who's dying, even at the last breath of their life, they'll want to extend their life a little more. Oh, I haven't seen my grandchildren, finishing their education. I want to see this and this and this. I'm doing it just for them, but they don't realize that, they are accruing their own karma. You have, your time is, as you're approaching the final hours, what should you be focusing on? Because if not that, you'll be taking birth again in that same condition. Who knows, you may come back either as a human or as a lower species. So, even though this is something that we all know of, as practicing devotees, we hear this over and over again, but it's there in the Bhagavatam and it comes in different shapes and forms as we see here. Like I said, when I first read this chapter, it didn't occur to me up until here that birth is also quite painful. So, there's also a mention here of just by knowledge, one doesn't get liberated, one needs the mercy of the Lord. Now, as we are approaching Bhadra Purnima, there was a reference made to King Nriga. If everyone's heard of King Nriga from the 10th canto. So there's a story related to Bhadra Purnima which came up but actually when I was listening to the class by Maharaj, she was describing that a lot of times, even whilst practicing Krishna consciousness in our own bhakti practice, that idea may come in our mind, if we're not practicing pure devotional service, but that idea may come in our mind, is Krishna our exclusive shelter? Is our shelter something outside of Krishna? Do we take shelter of something else? So the story of Nriga is actually a testament to that, or what actually happens. So King Nriga, as the story unfolds, if you all want to refer to it, it's in chapter 64 of Canto 10. Samba and some other of Krishna's associates were actually playing, and while they were playing, they were quite exhausted and they felt thirsty. While they felt thirsty, they went to a well, and in the well they see a huge lizard just in the shape of a mountain. And they tried all kinds of means. They tried their leather thongs, they tried ropes to pull the lizard out, but nothing worked. As Krishna was nearby, he comes to the well, and with his left hand he just picks up the lizard and takes it out. And simply by the touch of Krishna's lotus palms, this lizard gets transformed into an exalted demigod and assumes his beautiful form, and everyone's astounded. Oh, what is this? From a lizard, this person became such a beautiful demigod. And then Krishna, even though he's omniscient, knows everything, he asks the demigod, can you please describe who you are and what put you in this condition? And King Nriga said, my lord, even though you know everything, but still, I'll say. And he tells him, I was formerly King Nriga, son of King Ikshwaku. You must have heard my name as among in the list of those who are most charitable. So he tells the Lord. He said, I have given cows in charity, as many cows in charity as there are grains of sand on this planet, and as many drops of water that come through when rain comes. So he said, I'd done all of these things. It gives you an estimation of how much charity this king had given. Now, what's being emphasized here is that somewhat of that karma kanda mentality. Now, what happens further is that he said, I've given profusely to brahmanas, and one day it just happened to be that one of the cows that I'd given to one of the brahmanas, she just broke through from his shed and came into my shed and started and was mingling with the other cows. And at that very moment, another brahmana came, and I gave that same whatever herd of cows that were there in the shed, I gave it to the second brahmana. Later on, it came to be known to the first brahmana that this cow was there, and these are in the hundreds of thousands, and this brahmana was able to spot that the cow that was given to me was actually is actually in the shed of another brahmana. He right away goes to the king. He goes to King Riga and he says, give me back my cow. And then King Riga said, I'll give you 100,000 cows. Just excuse me of this one offense. And he says, no. Then there's an argument between the two brahmanas, and whilst there's an argument, they come to King Riga, and Riga says, please, stop fighting. I'll give you 100,000 cows each. Just leave this one cow. And the brahmana says, no, I want my one cow. And in the purport is described, he was a first class brahmana, which means that he had stopped accepting charity, and now so again, there's more description given as to why, a brahmana stands for truth, and as a matter of principle. So we won't go into much of this, but what happens as a result of this is that he suffers a reaction. King Riga suffers a reaction, and at the end of his life, he's taken to the court of Yamaraj. When he goes to the court of Yamaraj, Yamaraj says, there's no end to the piety that you have as a result of your unending charity. You can enjoy for there's no end to your radiant pleasure. However, there's a sinful reaction too. Which one would you prefer? Sinful reaction first, or have to be in the heavenly planets? Now, King Riga was intelligent. He said, I'll take birth as, I'll suffer from a reaction first, my sinful reaction first. And then right away, he just takes the form of a lizard. Then when he tells this to Krishna, and the boys are hearing it, then when he tells it, then he comes to him and says, I was noteworthy of two qualities. One is devotion to the brahmanas and generosity. Srila Jiva Goswami writes in this purport that unlike Maharaj Ambarish, King Riga did not exclusively take shelter of pure devotional service or complete devotional service, as King Ambarish had in the regulative stages. And unlike Ambarish Maharaj, who even though when he was agitated by Durvasa Muni didn't give in to anger, King Riga, however, was unable to do so. So a lot of times, what's our exclusive shelter? So again, as we are practicing sadhakas, we need to understand what's the goal, even though there's sambandha, prayojana, sambandha, abhidaya, and prayojana. Prayojana should be very much at the forefront of our consciousness. What's our goal? So King Riga, even though he somehow or the other he didn't have full faith, or he didn't practice pure devotional service, he took shelter of the feature of generosity or giving charity to the brahmanas. It highlights that even though we may do everything perfectly, but even one small defect or discrepancy can actually result in what it is. As opposed to what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita 9.30, Apiche Sudarasharo Bhajate Mahamananyava. So Krishna protects. That means the direct process of devotional service protects. At that moment, King Nriga says, he reminds Krishna that, but I had a desire to see you, my Lord. And what is that desire? Once King Nriga had met a devotee who wanted to build a beautiful temple for the Lord, and he also wanted to have copies of, this is written in the purports, I'm quoting it verbatim, of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. And King Nriga arranged for this. He arranged for, all of the paraphernalia for and all the construction that actually was needed for the temple of the Lord, and copies of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. The devotee was so pleased that he actually blessed King Nriga, one day you shall see the Lord. So from then he had this desire to see the Lord. So even though you can say it was mixed devotional service or whatever it may be, but he had the desire to see the Lord, and because he had served another devotee, that entitled him to see the Lord. So this is called mercy of the Lord. One may ask, what gives rise to bhakti? In Madhurya Kadambini, Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur explains it very beautifully. We won't have time to get into that because I'm seeing we've already run out of time. But he describes who gives bhakti. One answer may be Krishna gives bhakti. But then Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, I envy no one, I'm equal to everyone. So if Krishna gives bhakti, that means he's partial. Even though Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, he's impartial. So that can't be true, because Krishna says clearly, I envy no one and I am equal to everyone. Then what else can create bhakti or can sprout bhakti in one's heart? Good karma, piety. Well, if you think about it, piety is actually material. It's in this material world. Then that too doesn't fully, convince one that gives. What brings about bhakti is carried in the heart of a devotee, and super soul, and Krishna is in the heart of that devotee, because the devotee carries Krishna in his heart. So, because the devotee prays for the well-being of other living entities, Krishna in the heart is actually obliged to bestow his mercy upon that living entity for which is being prayed for. Once Srila Prabhupada wrote in one initiation letter, I noted in your good presence of your enthusiasm in Krishna consciousness, thereby I prayed for you. So Srila Prabhupada prayed for that for that devotee. So this devotee is mentioned because that's our good fortune. How fortunate are we? Because we always talk about this term being causeless mercy. Yeah, mercy is actually causeless because we may not fully understand how some things are manifesting in our life, but at the same time, how fortunate are we to be in this age, just 500 years away from when Lord Chaitanya came to this planet. So, Lord Maharaj would say the deepest mystery is not how we are here and how is this happening to us, but the deepest mystery is our weakness or our determination. Because the determination is weak, that's why we are not able to fully appreciate what's been actually offered to us. So, mercy. Devotees are very kind. I was remembering a story by His Grace Brahmananda Prabhu, brother of Gargamuni Prabhu. He was saying in one of his offerings to Srila Prabhupada, God is not very kind. Or he was saying, I think Krishna is not very kind. But Srila Prabhupada is the most kind and merciful. Because Krishna did not come to the Lower East Side, Srila Prabhupada came to the Lower East Side and he rescued me. So he was glorifying Prabhupada, that Prabhupada, who is more merciful than you. So in each of our lives, if we examine, somehow or the other we've been touched by the presence of Srila Prabhupada through his disciples and through other well-wishers who have actually sincerely prayed for us. So we actually take gratitude from that and we offer our gratitude. And the best way of offering a gratitude is to somehow share this good fortune with others, as was described by King Riga, that he helped for either distribution or for placing sets or books of transcendental literatures with for this particular devotee. So in giving, we actually gain, and this is the beauty of bhakti, that by giving we actually gain more, as opposed to other processes, that maybe just rather, if we somehow or the other just, I wouldn't say safeguard, but we protect. So we protect our devotion people, but if we look at the mural Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, then in giving we actually gain. So I've gone over time here. I'll stop here. Maybe one question or something. Concise Krishna. He arranged for copies of Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. This devotee wanted copies. In the Bhagavatam 10:64-25, in the purport. The only reason why it came to be because of Bhadra Purnima, there was reference made to it, and then when I read it, I'm like, oh, it specifically said copies of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Krishna. Yeah, Prabhu, these courses, now we need to understand what's the underlying, so as there are courses also such as Bhakti Sadachar, Vaishnava Etiquette, Bhakti Shastri, Bhakti Vaibhav, and obviously it goes all the way to Bhakti Vedanta. What does Krishna say in the Bhagavad Gita, which is Ahameva Vedya, from all the Vedas I am to be known? Now, this knowledge is best realized in the association of devotees. I was hearing His Holiness Devamrita Swami giving a lecture in New Zealand this past December, and he said that for us to think that if we can grow in a Krishna consciousness without the association of devotees, then we are actually an illusion. Also, known as Radha Maharaj once said that Bharat Maharaj, even up to the stage of Bhava, he fell down because he didn't have the association of devotees, someone to pull him and say, hey, what are you doing? So this knowledge in the association of devotees will actually take us to where we are meant to be. Thank you. Okay, Ash, thank you. I shall end here. Grantha Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Hidai Gaur Premanande, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki. Hare Krishna.